Welcome to another edition of the Humanities in Action virtual seminar series. This is staged by the Faculty of Humanities and Education, and we're looking at the theme of Black Lives Matter. Today we have a very interesting presentation from a passionate lecturer at the Caribbean School of Media and Communication. But before I introduce him, let me tell you that he's speaking on the topic Black Skin, White Screens, Representation of Blackness in the Media, Representations of Blackness in the Media. And it's only too fitting that we have not only a lecturer, but a researcher in the area explore this very interesting topic. Steffon R.K. Campbell is a Trinbagonian assistant lecturer at the Caribbean School of Media and Communications based at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. Additionally, he's a podcaster, producer, communication consultant, and is currently pursuing a PhD in social policy at UWI Mona. His areas of specialization include investigative journalism, organizational communication, communication on taboo subjects, social policy, and the role of media in public information and education. Before Steffon begins, I want to encourage all of the listeners to utilize the chat section to ask your questions, and towards the end of this presentation, we will certainly be aiming to address all of those questions. So without further ado, let me welcome once more Steffon Campbell.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful that you are the one moderating the session today. Greetings to everyone. As Dr. Obika suggested, the title of my presentation is Black Skin, White Screens, Representations of Blackness in Media. And the name, the title gives credence to Frantz Fanon's seminal book, Black Skin, White Masks, that I believe everyone should read. And so the presentation today is a Fanonian look at the experiences of black people in connection or as a result of the media and how they are portrayed and the very real impacts on their lives. And so before we go into it, I just wanted to share this quote from Fanon himself, that sometimes people hold a core belief that is very strong. When they are presented with evidence that works against that belief, the new evidence cannot be accepted. It would create a feeling that is extremely uncomfortable, called cognitive dissonance. And because it is so important to protect that core belief, they would rationalize, they would ignore, and even deny anything that doesn't fit that core belief. And so for everyone who is viewing this, I want all of you to check your biases, check your core beliefs, to try to understand if you have ever tried to cast aside, ignore the plight of someone who has come to you with very real experiences, something that you've seen in the media, that you've read in the newspaper, that you've seen online, that you've seen in a video game, and try to understand if you have tried to be sympathetic with oppressors, sympathetic with racists, sympathetic with those who have killed black people, not just in the United States of America, but globally. If you are always trying to make an excuse for the victor and not the victim, if you've always tried to make an excuse for the institutions that have not necessarily served us best as people of African descent, instead of trying to understand the very real experiences of certain individuals. And so today we are going to be looking at 5 things. We're going to be looking at the core problem under investigation. We're also going to look at the distorted portrayals of people of African descent in media. And when I say media, I need to qualify. We are not just speaking about television or radio or print. We are talking about games. We are talking about social media, because essentially this is a meta-synthesis of the experiences of black people globally. There are examples on every continent of the experiences of black people. And so we're going to look at distorted portrayals. We're going to also look at the reasons behind it, the why. We're going to look at the impact of media on the physical, on the mental, on the emotional, and even the financial. And finally, we are going to see what is the best way forward. And so let's get into the core problem, and I just want you to look at this video for me.
You see this and you wonder, did he lose his keys or is he blatantly stealing that bike? In broad daylight, he hammers and then saws on the chain. When that doesn't work, he pulls out an industrial-sized bolt cutter. And when he's asked, he fesses up.
You lost the lock?
No, not exactly.
But he's not a real thief. Justin Kelly is an actor, and our hidden cameras are rolling.
What happened? Nothing. I can't get through the lock. I mean, I know this is weird, but you wouldn't happen to know whose bike this is.
Yeah.
All right, good. Thank you.
It was odd that somebody had all that equipment.
But you didn't do anything.
No.
That's true.
That's the bottom line.
Lots of people stop and stare. A few even question the actor.
He doesn't have to ask. Is that your bike?
I guess technically no. Okay. Bye.
In over an hour, about 100 people pass by. Only George and Arlene try to stop him. Some tell us they plan to call the police later. Others say they're scared. Keep moving. This woman and her friends give our thief the benefit of the doubt. When we ask why, Bisa Washington tells us first impressions matter.
I remember thinking young white men don't usually carry burglar tools.
So we all make assumptions, huh?
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe he works for the park.
We replace our white thief with this young man, Matlock. Remember, both actors dress in a similar way and are about the same age.
Is that your bike?
Nah.
Then what are you cutting the chain for?
Right away. Right away, somebody yelled. Wow. Within seconds, another person confronts our thief.
Is that your bike?
Technically, it's not, but it's gonna be mine.
More people converge.
Is that on the cell phone? You call the police. He's like stealing somebody's bike.
Are you taking that bike? Is that your bike?
No, it's not, sir.
Oh, why are you doing that?
Is this any of y'all bikes? Is this your bike?
It's not. It belongs.
No, but
whoever's it is, it belongs to someone.
To who?
Well, not to you.
And sure enough, one man whips out a cell phone to call 911.
Yeah, there's someone taking a bike here.
Our actor triggers more reaction. Some people are even snapping pictures for evidence.
I got you, bud. I got you.
Guys, stealing the bike. Whose bike's over here?
Once everyone moves away, we reset our cameras, and within minutes, another outraged man is yelling.
Are you trying to steal that bike?
Excuse me, sir, but the bike's been here for days. Like, no one's gonna take it.
Well, that's not your bike then.
Yeah.
You can't just come in and take something from somebody.
Excuse me, sir.
Okay, I'll just take your tools away then. This yours, sir?
Please, sir, don't touch my stuff, sir. Please, sir, do not touch my stuff.
Well, you're touching somebody else's stuff.
Yeah, all right, but this has been here. Like, who's gonna take it?
Well, that doesn't make it your property.
Technically, it does.
No, it doesn't technically. It's not yours to take.
All right, sir.
When we bring out our cameras, David Robb wants us to go after the thief.
That kid in the red shirt.
He's hacking away at a bike that's not his.
And he has a right to take it and steal it. And he's come here with...
She may not look like your average bike thief, but actress Ashley Carpenter makes sure anyone who asks knows she's up to no good.
Need a hand?
You don't know who this is, do you?
Whose bike it is?
Yeah.
With a little help from Ed Fitzsimmons, the bike chain easily falls away.
Up everywhere. Oh my goodness, what a strong man you are.
And he isn't the only man who stops in his tracks. What's this guy thinking?
You know, you pull up, you don't know if she lost her key, if she's trying to actually take the bike, but then again, she's a girl. And would you ever see a girl doing that?
Steal?
You never know. Most of the times it's a guy going to do something like that.
Reginald pedals right past his appalled wife straight to our actress, asking her if she needs a hand.
Okay, I'll eventually get it.
I did some time in Rollway. I can steal this.
Oh, you can steal it? Maybe you can help me steal it.
So, this is a video I show to my students every single year when we look at understanding the media. If you realize there was a totally different reaction to the black male attempting to steal the bike versus the white woman and the white man. There is the automatic suspicion of the black body, and the benefit of the doubt is oftentimes given to the white body. And so today we're going to be looking at, as the core problem, the relationship between media portrayals and the lived experiences of black people. And as I said, it is a meta-synthesis. So we're going to be looking, so these are results from television fiction, from magazines, from advertising, from video games, right? And we are going to be looking at the broad patterns that have emerged from the research. And so these are the patterns, the distorted portrayals versus the real world. And the first distorted portrayal is underrepresentation. So usually you do not see a black person as an authority in areas, in technical areas. Even in video games, that individual is usually someone on the street, some typical roles, right? And this is in the news, this is in advertising. And so even though the statistics will show that black people in certain roles are much higher than we would like to think, in the media it is underrepresented. For example, the black father in the United States is the most present father among all of the other primary races. But the narrative, the rhetoric that is oftentimes shown is that he is an absentee father. And that is just one example. And so there is an underrepresentation of black people in positive roles across all media. Which leads me to the second point. There is the exaggerated negative associations. So for example, the black person is the face of criminality. The black person is the face of unemployment. The black person is the face of poverty, right? And these things are exaggerated. I don't know about you, but growing up, I remember those commercials that spoke to donating money, just $1 to children in Africa, and they always show these starving babies with flies all over their faces. And I'm not saying that these things did not exist, but they never showed the bigger picture. So to you, this was all Africa was about. When they spoke of Egypt, they never spoke of Egypt as if it were on the continent of Africa. And the same thing with South Africa. So there was always these exaggerated negative associations with anything that had to do with blackness. We're not even talking black religions and how these things are depicted as negative and evil and bad, right? These and studies have shown these things. The next thing is limited positive associations. The black man oftentimes, especially in American media, oftentimes is limited to certain roles. Either a sports player or an artist, a musician. And so for the young boy, the young man, the young black woman as well, there are very few positive associations if you were looking to and through media that you can agree with, that you can relate to, right? And so it's only about the virility, the strong black man, the over-sexualized black woman, right? And these are the things that are limited, and oftentimes you cannot necessarily blame an individual if they think that these are the only ways that they can attain a certain level of success. In addition to the fact that when we discuss the theory of media framing or the framing theory, black people are always distorted or framed to be the negative, the evil, the bad person. The news, for example, and these are well documented, if a black person committed a crime, you would see a mugshot. If the white person committed the same crime, chances are you would see a family picture, a family portrait. If the black person committed a crime, that individual is inherently bad. The white person committed a crime, then it must be mental illness. We need to understand what drove that individual to do such a heinous crime. He was a good boy. Where did this come from? Perhaps he was radicalized. Nothing inherently wrong with that individual, but we need to try to understand in order to be sympathetic with that white individual. Even as I think now, even the murder of Botham Jean, when the police officer went into the accidental apartment, and when you looked at some of the news reports, people were literally fishing to try to understand if there was a possibility he did something wrong. His own apartment, you know, did they find weed? Was he involved in something? Perhaps he did something to her previously. All of these things given the benefit of the doubt to the person who committed the act, right? Even one politician, I remember saying that Botham Jean found himself murdered. He wasn't murdered. He found himself murdered in his own home, right? And finally, the missing piece. Oftentimes, the experiences of the black person, we look at it, and the actions of the black person, we look at it in a vacuum without understanding the impacts of systemic racism, without understanding the impacts of economic disadvantage, without understanding that even though the black population in the United States, for example, is 13%, and in London is 3%, that in the United States, black people make up 33% of the prison population. And even though it's going down, they still represent the highest percentage per 100,000 of prison inmates. And so when you look at, even if we were to discuss fatherlessness, and we say that the father is not there, we oftentimes don't try to understand the fact that this individual is in prison, and a lot of fathers are imprisoned and cannot be there, right? The white family earns 10 times more than the average black family. $171,000 US per year versus $17,000 US per year. Even the war on drugs is viewed differently. The opioid crisis is being viewed totally different from the cocaine or the crack epidemic. And oftentimes individuals in a place of privilege forces or views that black body or that black individual as the reason for every single thing that has happened in his or her life. And so we're going to look at, why is this the case? Why are black bodies never given the benefit of the doubt? Why, if a police officer kills an unarmed black man, there is the automatic jump to try to figure out if the individual did something wrong. That is oftentimes the automatic response. And from the meta-syntheses and drawing from a lot of, from many scholars like Rivers and Tucker and Guerrero, we realize that there is a lack of black in the boardrooms of these production companies. There is a lack of black in the creation and the funding and even the consultation. So at the different levels in media, there are very few black-owned studios. There are very few black movies that show black people in a positive way. And thank God for social media and the internet, but there has been a greater democratizing of access to creative products and tools and technologies, that we can start telling more of our own stories. However, the audience, oftentimes the producer assumes that this is what the audience wants without ever asking, and continues to fuel sometimes these negative rhetoric, right? And so if it is that the producer believes that we want to see more slave films, we don't necessarily want to see a Mansa Musa, right? The richest man that ever lived, that was a black man, right? We don't want to see these things. Let's continue to fuel the rhetoric. Let's continue to fuel the stereotype, because we believe that this is what the audience wants. But on the flip side, sometimes these assumptions are accurate, that these things are actually what the audience wants to see. The audience might want to see another mad black woman, a hysterical black woman. It fits within the stereotype, and oftentimes, as Fanon says, we are quite comfortable with these stereotypes because it doesn't cause any kind of discomfort. But we can't ignore the political motivations, especially in this day and age, of promoting certain rhetoric, immigrant rhetoric, black rhetoric, in order to fuel certain political motivations like mass incarceration, reducing welfare, right? And so these things are coming up. These alt-right and far-right platforms are popping up almost every single day that continue to have very real day-to-day impacts on black lives and black bodies. And finally, there is producer bias. So the individual themselves, whether it's conscious or unconscious, even though in the presence of information or evidence that proves otherwise, they believe that nothing can go so. They believe that this is how it should be and it's not another way. And I often say that media begins with P. And the P stands for people, because media are extensions of what people see, what people believe, and what people think. The angle that the photographer chooses to take a certain shot, the interview, the segment of an interview that a producer chooses to edit out, to focus on, all of these things are based on some form of bias. Right? And so these things, whether individual or a culmination of these things, lead to very real effects in the lives of black people. And these effects, especially in media, we talk about ABC. Media can affect one's attitude, it can affect one's behavior, and it can affect one's cognition. But let's start with A. The impact of lack of black representation in media, the impact of political motivations, the impact of producer bias, the impact of assumptions by the audience, or sometimes even what the audience needs, has very real impacts on black bodies and the attitudes towards black bodies. For example, rigid stereotypes. The individual is either this or this, right? Lack of sympathy when something has happened to a black person. Greater levels of aggression. Exaggerated views of criminality. Evil and ignorance towards black people. And the interesting thing is that when experiments were done, even those individuals that were aware of what racism is or that they shouldn't discriminate, in one experiment in particular, the amygdala, which is the region of the brain that is responsible for fear, was still triggered when they showed them black bodies, black faces in certain contexts. Right? And so even though they should know better, there is oftentimes this inherent bias that the black person towards black people is definitely affected by what we see in the media. And scholars suggest that it is even worsened when individuals have no real experience with black people. Remember, black people are the minority, especially in the United States. And we haven't even gotten to the Caribbean yet, because the symptoms are the same, although the numbers are different, right? That there are these sentiments, these negative sentiments, especially if my only window into the world is a box, is a screen. If I only see black people as criminals in the media and in a movie, then chances are this is the only thing I'm going to believe, because this is the gateway to the world. Let's go to B. Studies have shown less attention from doctors as a result of these perceptions of black people. You know, the black infant mortality rate is extremely high. The black mothers dying in childbirth is extremely high, right? There's a greater chance of being shot by a police officer. An unarmed black man versus an unarmed white man. There's a greater chance, even if you're not doing anything. It doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter if you had a fake gun or a real gun. It doesn't matter if your car broke down and you were waiting for the emergency. It doesn't matter what you did. There is a greater chance. There's a greater view that this individual is evil by default, simply because of the color of their skin. Harsher sentencing. I don't know if you all were aware of the young girl known by the name of Grace, who was imprisoned for not doing her homework during COVID since May, right? For not doing her homework. And some people are still going to try to figure out and give the benefit of the doubt to the judge and to the institution for making such a decision. Right? There is more stringent policing of the black body. And when I say policing, I'm not just talking the police service. I'm talking our institutions. I'm talking about how we should wear our hair. In this day and age, the individual, and going back to Fanon, there is a double consciousness that us as black people have to constantly contend with, because we believe that if we educate ourselves enough, if we are wealthy enough, that according to the system, we are going to educate and enrich ourselves out of blackness. That's not how it works. And it shouldn't work like that. I've heard sentiments that, like, you know, why choose to still wear a hairstyle that discriminates, that forces someone to discriminate against you? And the simple response is, isn't that my freedom as a human being, not as a race of people, as a human being put on this earth? My freedoms and my rights should be equal to anybody else, not because of the texture, not because of the hairstyle. And the laws that support these things, anyone that says we should not question these laws has not taken a good look at history. Jim Crow and laws that worked against the black body were very real. And although we are making slow progress, we are not making a progress slow enough. And although we are black, we are still viewing each other through a white lens, through a colonial lens, right? And these are things that make us quite uncomfortable. But in order to make any real change, we have to acknowledge, for those of us who are still seeing through that lens, we have to acknowledge some of the racist tendencies, some of the things that we do and say on a daily basis to each other. Oh, by the way, I'm not just talking about the external, because we internalize some of these things as well. For the individual who believes that since the world is viewing me as an aggressor, then probably I am an aggressor. And if this is the only way I am going to be seen or heard, then perhaps these are tendencies or traits that I need to take on, especially if you are going to assume that I am this way anyway. You know, psychologists have suggested that because of these repeated views that box black people into certain roles in the media, there is this impact on the cognitive processes of constantly having to code switch and wondering if you are good enough for certain roles or certain jobs. And so we are limited, or we limit ourselves mentally because of what we've seen and because of the lack of reference that we have in the media, right? And as I alluded to before, the very cognition or the things that we remember when we see a black face, especially a black male face, whether it's conscious or unconscious, these are the things that we carry on and we continue to perpetuate. And so when the individual does something, the default is that it is negative. And these things, as I said, these things are viewed across a range of media. So it's not just one particular medium. They are the examples of racist commercials, all the way in China, of the Chinese woman putting a black man in a washer and him emerging as a Chinese man. And there are certain veritable blind spots of those with racist tendencies that we oftentimes have to contend with in our everyday life and our everyday existence. But if me defending myself is still offensive to you, then we still have lots of work to do. If me saying that I feel like I deserve to be seen more, I deserve to be respected more, my life should matter as much as yours, is offensive to you, then you need to check your privilege. Then you need to check your biases. Because the difference is, the discomfort that it causes you is far less than the matter of life and death as it relates to me, right? And so, as we look at the way forward, this is just a snippet, this is just a snapshot, this is just my contribution to the discussion as someone who has both seen it in media, who has studied it, but someone who has also experienced the impact of negative stereotypes in a very real way, in real life. And so, the way forward is three things that we need to do. And this is primarily and especially for individuals who are producing content. But it is also for the audience, because those lines are being distorted. The producer and the consumer has been very much distorted as technology has advanced. And so the first thing is we need more representation. In representation, at all levels where media content is being produced in these large conglomerates, in these large production studios, there needs to be that voice, that individual, that black individual who has some experience with certain things, so that we can check our biases, or the producers can check their biases. But mind you, there's something I need to suggest. Every black person might have similar experiences, but it might not be the same. Because oftentimes, that is one of the arguments used against any movement that seeks to liberate the black person. I didn't experience it, so clearly what you're going through is a myth. That's not the truth. I made it out, so clearly you can too. We oftentimes never look at the other layers of privilege. We never look at all the other experiences. And so that is another thing that we need to understand, even when it comes to representation, that no person should be placed in a box, and no person should be viewed as the representation of their entire race, right? But we need to understand that there are some similarities as a result of our race, and there are some systematic and systemic things that we need to contend with and we need to solve in order to enjoy certain freedoms as a human being. The next step is to make the invisible visible, because oftentimes someone in a place of privilege honestly does not see what we are going through. And so the role of the creator is to show this in the realest way, without having to worry about, or without worrying about what the other person might think, or if we are going to make them uncomfortable. And this is something that throughout life I struggled with, and a lot of black people have struggled with, wondering if you need to show how much things or how many elements of your life you struggle with so that you don't make someone else uncomfortable, right? But we need to show the systemic issues. We need to show the problems at the different levels. We need to show that we have to work twice as hard, at least, to get even close to what individuals of other races have gotten. And sometimes we show the success and we don't necessarily show the struggle. And finally, we need to make it real, because media are representations of reality, not reality in and of itself. And so the aim should always be to strive towards capturing the realest and the biggest picture as possible in order for all of us to understand. There needs to be representations that we all can relate to, as many of us can relate to, right? So that we are able to see ourselves at different levels of societies, in different capacities, in order to make informed choices, in order to encourage the next generation that you don't have to be an athlete, you don't have to be a musician, you can be a professor, you can be a lecturer, you can be a computer technician, you can be an entrepreneur, you can be a billionaire, you can be the richest man in the world, right? This is how we make it real. This is how we represent as many of us as possible. And sometimes this means taking it up on ourselves to create and produce and put out our own stories, to reduce the impact of framing and filtering, so by the time it comes out, it is very whitewashed and not as, quote unquote, offensive to the other person. And so the struggle continues. As I said, this is just a small part. This is a method synthesis, and the work continues. But we all have a part to play, and we all have a part to say, and this is mine. So let me end with this quote. You know, the first need of a free people is to define their own terms, not our own terms in relation to anyone else. We should not be defined by our hair in relation to someone else. We should not be defined by our skin in relation to someone else. We should be able to define our own terms and live by those terms, just like everyone else has the freedom and the right to do. So thank you very much for paying attention. This is my contact information, Dr. Obika. If anyone has any questions after these questions that I'm sure some of you might have, then you can contact me here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Campbell, for that very powerful presentation. I certainly enjoyed it and learned a lot. And I'm certain that the audience that looked at the live and those that will view the recording on YouTube via Mona Media, that they can filter those questions to you via the social media contact. So I have one or two questions just to engage in a conversation with you, Steffon. In terms of, I found very interesting the way in which you identify the problem that of systemic racism that has influenced the misrepresentations of Black people, Black bodies, Black identity in the media. And you started to allude to that solution of, or the solutions of the way forward. But I'm wondering, via social media, what role can we play as not only consumers, but also content creators to be able to overcome these negative stereotypes?
Well, Doc, we need to realize that, well, social media has done a lot to highlight or reinvigorate the cause that we've been fighting for decades upon decades, right? But these depictions or the content that we've captured, the next step is to see how these things can influence and inform and change policy. Because as much as it can be confined to the social media space and we can view it and see it and be moved and motivated, the next thing is action, right? And so some people might be content creators, other people might be policy makers or aspiring policy makers like yourself, and that's the area I'm going into in social policy, right? But the first step is getting the information out there. Everyone has a role to play in this movement. So capture these things, create these stories. Don't feel afraid. And as I said, and this is something that Fanon has alluded to, because oftentimes we are afraid to be our true, real, and raw selves for fear of offending someone else, for fear of being limited in our opportunities in life. And it's a terrifying thing that you have to sacrifice self in order to make it in life, right? So the social media space has done a lot to capture some of the experiences, but we need to keep putting out this information, this context, getting it to the right people so that eventually it can lead to the changes and the creation of policies and also the changes in some of these laws that we have.
Most certainly. So I like how you keep going back to that foundation that in a sense, the change has to begin with the individuals, also from a position not of content creation only, but also of governance. So I want to ask you a governance question. I'm not sure if you have an opinion on whether we should have quotas, for instance, because I know we have people who create content and there are numerous challenges to access the channels to be able to have that content viewed. I know social media has helped to empower the creators, but from the policy standpoint, do you think regulation should be saying, hey, let's get more equity in the distribution of content?
You're more suited to respond to that as the media policy maker, but I think if I were to contribute to this discussion, I think we can either take that approach, or I believe a far more valuable approach is media literacy. Understanding and training our generation or the next generation that not everything you see in media and through media is an accurate depiction or the only depiction of the community that you are from. Because these are things I had to learn on my own. And as a Trinbagonian, as a metropolitan society, we've experienced different races and the contentions and the media and the content and the context, right? But there was always this reminder in my family that you need to take all of these things with a pinch of salt, right? This is not the only thing you can be. This is not the only thing you can become. Don't internalize this too much to feel like this is you. This is a representation of someone's story and of someone's experience. Mind you, these things were lacking in the past, but I'm looking at the way forward. And so I really believe that there should be some level of equity in representing everyone's story. But then we're going to have to look into the fear that people feel like some group is being overrepresented, some group is getting more attention. And these are the discussions that are happening now as relates to Black Lives Matter. Why are we talking about Black lives and not other lives? Not realizing that we have been talking about Black lives even before the hashtag existed. And we are just trying to get, and I like the word you use, get that level of equity, right? Because that's what we need. We are starting from the back. So equality isn't necessarily the best thing for us because we are all equal under God and placed on this planet. But there are so many things that strip us of this equality as we've gone through life. And media oftentimes leaves that aspect or that element out of the bigger picture.
Most certainly. So you alluded to the point about the internalization of the stereotypes and how damaging they can be. I want to probe that a little bit. To what extent have we, the people, because I remember you mentioned the people, that P, that's very critical, but also we as Black people, to what extent have we internalized it and almost caused, so we've become part of the problem that we're trying to fight? You know, so whereas this social aspect that you have identified is so critical to change the representations or the representations. You know, that was a wonderful point that you made there. I don't know if you want to elaborate on it.
It runs deep, and there are theories that have been put forward as relates to the impact of slavery on the generational traumas of us as individuals. There's the need or the feeling that in order to make it, look, when we look at the individual and the individual needs, right? You have to put food on the table, you need a roof over your head and all of these things. Oftentimes we have to sacrifice the struggle in order not to struggle. And so Steve Biko said this, the strongest, the greatest weapon in the mind, in the hands of the oppressor is the minds of the oppressed. And so we have internalized these things in order to survive, not necessarily to live full lives, because the system itself teaches you that in order to survive and prosper, you need to do all of these things that are anti-Black. From your hair, to the way you talk, to the choices you make, to the shape of your body, right? All of these things, and we can take it even further when we talk about the fact that a lot of Black populations are relegated to certain communities. So on top of your appearance, you are now judged and restricted by your address, right? And so it is deep, and it takes a lifetime of re-socialization, but it also takes a greater level of sessions or forums like this to put it out, to inform and enlighten individuals that you are not alone in this struggle. And after we've put it out there, there must be spaces, there must be organizations, there must be platforms that we can move it from information to action.
Steffon, there's much more that we could talk about. Certainly in the future, we could probably utilize some of the platforms that you yourself have created. I want to endorse, or I would also like you to mention some of the very podcasts that you're engaged in as platforms where we could further some of these discussions, because there's so much more that we can ask. But one of the solutions you had suggested is to make the invisible visible. And I find that to be a very powerful solution. And in that encapsulates the whole notion of us starting to believe in ourselves, because it's also discovering that our own identity, and now starting to utilize the channels to be able to tell our stories. So I want to end not by asking a question, but asking you if you want to further elaborate on the solutions that you see that can help us as Black people, as people who have been marginalized through systemic racism, not only in the United States, but to some extent, us in the Caribbean have experienced some measure of restrictions, of barriers that have prevented us from being able to not only tell our stories, but to see and to witness ourselves. So I want to give you the final word there, Steffon. Make the invisible visible, and any other solution you have identified.
One word, ownership. And it has to do with ownership of our channels. You know, when you think of individuals like Tyler Perry, who, even though we might have disagreed with his depictions of blackness, eventually he created a movie production studio that rivals Hollywood, that now he has the control over the depictions or the representations of Black people, right? So ownership is very important, because let's be honest, if it is that there is, especially in our capitalist societies, that it takes money to do everything, if you're starting from a disenfranchised position or place and you don't have access to money, that's the first compromise. So the production company says, well, this is a bit too edgy, let's take that out. All right, this is a bit, why are we making a movie, a fiction about Black people beating white people? That doesn't sit well with me. Let's take that out, right? And there are a lot of things, especially white guilt, that we have to contend with when we are creating content, so that it soothes and appeases those who are in places of power. So ownership of the platforms is very important. And you mentioned the podcast. That is why when we created the Men's Truth podcast, it was not aligned to any Glean or any Observer or any radio station, because there are going to be some things that are said honestly that we believe should not be restricted by any powers that be, because we are the power. The other thing when it comes to ownership is owning our bodies and owning our expressions. And that can only come through owning our institutions. Doc, you know that a lot of our institutions in the Caribbean have been inherited. We never chose our institutions, right? These are things that we have inherited, and embedded in these inheritances aren't necessarily things that suit us. You know, from the white wigs in the court and all of these things. There are a lot of things that don't necessarily suit us that we have inherited, but we have now internalized and claimed. So we need to start to own our bodies, own our expressions as self, as offensive as it might be. As I said in the presentation, if me defending myself or expressing myself is offensive to you, then there is some work that needs to be done in your mind, and then we can have a discussion, right? So that's the thing I would love to leave with us. We need to own our production companies, own our channels, own our bodies, and ultimately, if we can own or claim ownership in a positive way of our institutions as well. And let's not get to the syllabus, the education syllabus, and all of these things that don't necessarily represent and ultimately benefit or push us to the level that we need to be. So the struggle continues. The discussion is also going to continue, Dr. Obika.
Thank you very much, Steffon R.K. Campbell. Powerful presentation entitled Black Skin, White Screens, Representations of Blackness in Media. Thank you very much.